A few years ago, researchers at Queen's University in Canada tried to count thoughts. The difficulty, it turned out, was that thoughts resist being counted. They arrive already half-formed, blur into each other, and resurface without invitation. What the researchers found a way to track was the moment when thinking shifts from one subject to another. When they counted these transitions, the number came to around 6,200 in a single day. One new train of thought roughly every 14 seconds for every waking hour of a human life. We are, without question, the most thinking species this planet has ever produced. And almost none of us has ever watched a thought arrive. Right now, as you're listening, something is happening that you didn't initiate. Thinking. You didn't decide to begin. You didn't plan the first thought you'd have when you woke up this morning. It was already there when consciousness arrived, or it arrived before you were fully conscious to receive it. Try right now to predict the next thought you'll have after this sentence ends. You'll find you can't. The thought will come before the decision to have it. We experience ourselves as the authors of our thinking, but the evidence suggests we are more often its audience. We are inside our thinking the way a fish is inside water. The fish doesn't experience the ocean as ocean. It experiences it as world. Every movement, every perception, every event happens in the water through the medium of water. And the fish has no apparatus for noticing this because there has never been a moment outside the water from which to look back. The medium is invisible precisely because it is total. We are in roughly the same situation. We don't experience our thoughts as thoughts. We experience them as reality. When a thought arrives that says something has gone wrong, we don't register a mental event. We are inside a world in which something has gone wrong. The conviction doesn't feel like an interpretation. It feels like accurate perception. Thinking is extraordinary. It's the capacity that built language, cities, medicine, music, every structure and institution human beings have ever produced. And so, we have spent our whole lives learning to trust it. The lesson absorbed through school, through work, through every domain where careful reasoning produced better outcomes, was that when something is wrong, the answer is to think harder about it. More carefully, from more angles, apply the intelligence that has worked everywhere else. The lesson is correct most of the time. A logistical problem worked through carefully tends to resolve. A decision examined from enough angles tends to clarify. The mind earns its place as the default tool precisely because it keeps working. The trouble arrives slowly and without announcement when the mind turns that instrument on itself. A conversation ends and something about it doesn't settle. A word used, a moment misread, the way it landed. And the mind returns to it. Not once, looking for resolution, but repeatedly, finding none. The same sequence plays, the same questions arise. Nothing new comes, and yet the mind goes back, as if this time the return will yield something different. It doesn't. Or there's a thought that arrives in the early hours, not from a nightmare, just from the mind, already running when consciousness catches up. Something said last week, a decision not yet made, a version of next month in which something goes wrong. The mind working on it with great seriousness, as if one more pass might finally settle it. It never does. We call this overthinking, but the word misses what's actually happening. The problem isn't the quantity of thinking, it's that the thinking isn't getting anywhere and the mind returns anyway, and every argument you make for why this particular loop isn't worth another pass dissolves almost before you've finished making it. Something underneath the trying keeps generating the material. The returning happens on its own, and you are watching it happen. Something is driving this that runs deeper than habit or discipline. Once you see what it is, something shifts that didn't seem like it could. The Pali language, the language of the oldest surviving Buddhist texts, has a word for what the unobserved mind does. Papancha. Papancha means mental proliferation, the tendency to extend a thought without end once it has appeared. Something happens, a difficult exchange, a decision you're second-guessing, a moment you'd take back, and in that moment, the event is small and contained, but then the mind begins to work on it. It revisits the event from a different angle. It considers what was meant, what was implied, what it says about you. It finds earlier moments that seem to confirm the same conclusion. It runs forward to imagine how things will unfold from here. The original event was a stone dropped into still water. Papancha is the rings spreading from it, one ring generating the next, each moving outward, each touching more of the surface, until something that began as a single, specific moment has spread across everything in reach. The stone is no longer the point. The rings have their own momentum now. The mind doing this is not malfunctioning. It's doing exactly what it evolved to do: scan for problems, extract lessons from the past, predict what might come next. A mind that rehearses difficult conversations before having them, that revisits mistakes to understand what went wrong, that runs simulations of future risk. This is a mind that serves us well most of the time. The problem emerges when the same machinery that resolves practical problems gets applied to emotional ones, which don't resolve in the same way. You can think through a logistical problem until there's an answer. You can't think through grief until it resolves. You can't analyze an anxiety until it disappears. But the mind, not knowing this, or not accepting it, keeps applying the same approach. But ultimately, more thinking produces more thinking rather than resolution. In the early 2000s, a neuroscientist named Marcus Rachel at Washington University School of Medicine was studying what the brain does when it isn't given any particular task. The prevailing assumption was that a resting brain would show reduced activity, less happening, lower metabolic demand. What Rachel found was actually the opposite. Certain brain regions became significantly more active during rest than during focused tasks. The brain wasn't idling. It was working harder when left to itself than when given something to do. Rachel named this the default mode network, the state the brain returns to whenever attention isn't directed outward. And the activity of this network turned out to be largely self-referential. Processing past events, anticipating future ones, rehearsing social interactions, constructing and revising the ongoing story of who you are and how things stand. The idle brain is a ruminating brain, not by malfunction, but by design. A mind that uses its downtime to plan, model, and rehearse has a survival advantage over one that simply waits. But the same efficiency that makes the network useful is what makes it so resistant to interruption. When you decide to stop overthinking, you are asking the most metabolically active state your brain enters to stop doing what it does by default. The difficulty you have stopping reflects how well the system works, not something lacking in you. And then there is the particular trap of trying to intervene. Every argument you bring to bear, every careful case for why this loop isn't worth continuing, every appeal to reason, is itself produced by the same system. The default mode network doesn't stand aside when you try to override it. The override is more network activity, more rings spreading from the same stone. There is no position outside the machinery from which to apply pressure. Every lever you reach for is attached to the thing you're trying to stop, which raises a question that, once it surfaces, is difficult to let go of. If thinking cannot stop itself through more thinking, what can? In 1637, a French philosopher named René Descartes published a short treatise with an unusual ambition: to find something he could know with absolute certainty, not probable knowledge, not the best available evidence. Something that could survive any degree of doubt, that would remain standing even if everything else turned out to be wrong. He worked through the project with extraordinary care. He doubted his senses, which had deceived him before. He doubted his memories. He doubted whether the physical world he moved through each day might be an elaborate illusion. He found, unsettlingly, that almost everything he had assumed to be solid knowledge was susceptible to some version of doubt. Almost everything. Because at the very bottom of the stripping away, one thing remained: the activity of doubting itself. Someone was performing this skeptical exercise. The doubting was happening, and that meant the doubter existed. Cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore, I am. Thinking is the one thing that cannot be doubted, because even doubting it confirms it is happening. And from this, Descartes drew a conclusion that would prove enormously consequential. The thought and the thinker are the same thing. You are your thinking. This arrived at a specific historical moment, and the timing mattered. The old foundations of European selfhood, church authority, inherited certainty, the stability of tradition, were fracturing. Galileo had confirmed that official doctrine had been wrong about something fundamental. Into this vertigo, Descartes was offering a new floor to stand on, the individual rational mind, self-certifying, needing no external authority to validate it. It fit the moment so well that it didn't stay a philosophical position for long. It became an assumption, a background fact, the shape of how things simply are. We have inherited this completely. Of course, you are your thoughts, your opinions, your memories, your fears, the private commentary that narrates your life. This is you, self-evidently, in a way that barely needs stating. What else would you be? The practical consequences, when the thinking is going well, are unremarkable. But when papancha is running, when the mind is producing verdict after verdict, ring after ring, the Cartesian inheritance becomes its own source of suffering. If you are your thoughts, then the thought that says you've failed doesn't mean a failure occurred that the mind is processing. It means you have been assessed and found wanting. The thought that anticipates things going wrong doesn't mean the mind is running a predictive model. It means you are standing at the edge of something going wrong, right now. Every thought lands as autobiography, as fact about you, not activity in you. And if you are your thoughts, there is no position outside them from which to look. You cannot step back from your thinking any more than an eye can see itself seeing. Every attempt to observe the loop is made from inside the loop, using the same instrument that's generating it, which is why the intervention always dissolves on arrival, why deciding to stop thinking about something so rarely makes it stop. A lamp can illuminate almost anything, a room, a path, the pages of a book. The one thing it cannot illuminate is its own source. Turn it toward itself, and you find only more lamp. The light and the illuminating are the same act, and you cannot use one to examine the other. Thought is like this. The lamp cannot light itself, and a mind that is identical with its contents cannot step outside those contents by thinking harder about them. The Theravada Buddhist tradition, which predates Descartes by more than 2,000 years, started from a different premise entirely. It held that thinking is something that happens in the mind, that the mind is larger than its contents, and that something in awareness can watch thought without becoming it. This is presented not as metaphysics, but as something empirically verifiable, something anyone can confirm in direct experience, without needing to take it on faith. The detailed practical instructions left behind for how to do this weren't written because it required years of exotic training. They were written because it requires looking in a direction we are simply not in the habit of looking. The thing that notices papancha is not itself papancha. Right now, something in you is following these words, registering their meaning, moving through the sequence of the argument. That is not thinking in the papancha sense. It isn't generating loops or producing verdicts. It is simply present to what is here. And it was present before any thought about this arrived, and it will be there after the last thought about it is gone. You cannot catch it ruminating because it is the one doing the catching. The Pali word for this is sati, most often translated as mindfulness, though that word has been so absorbed into wellness culture that the original meaning is nearly impossible to hear in it anymore. The older sense is more precise. Sati means remembering, a returning to the one who is watching rather than being lost in what is watched. The instruction the word contains has nothing to do with concentration or clearing the mind. It is simply, remember where you are. The mind contains two things that are easy to conflate, the thinking and the one who can notice the thinking. These are not the same thing. Thinking moves, it accumulates, circles back, generates the next thought from the last. The noticing stays still. It has been present for every thought you've ever had, every spiral, every night spent turning something over that couldn't be resolved, without itself joining any of it. It watches. It doesn't take sides in what it watches. It doesn't add another loop of its own. It is simply there, and it has always been there. Once you notice this, really notice it, even for a moment, something in the architecture of the problem shifts. Not because the thinking stopped, because you have found a position that is not inside it. Take a thought that visits often, something like I've handled this wrong, or I'm falling behind, or whatever formulation your mind has for the sense that things are not going well. Experienced from inside, that thought has the quality of a verdict. It has already concluded. When you are inside it, the conclusion feels indistinguishable from reality. Now notice it as a thought, not agree with it, not argue. Simply observe that there is a mental event occurring, that the mind is producing this particular content at this particular moment. There is a thought that says I've handled this wrong. The content is identical. The relationship to it is completely different. From inside the thought, it is a fact about you. From the position of noticing, it is a fact about the thinking. One event among many, shaped by everything that preceded it, real in its way, but not the final word on anything. In that shift, barely a step, the thought's certainty begins to loosen. The capacity for this doesn't need to be built. The part of you following these words right now, aware of them, not just being carried by them, that is it. It's something like weather and the sky. The weather moves through, the sky doesn't. The assumption that the voice in your head is you has simply kept this unnamed, and what goes unnamed stays out of reach. What actually happens when you catch yourself mid-thought is not what most people expect. The thinking doesn't stop. Whatever had you a moment before is still there, still continuing, but now there is something else present that wasn't available when you were entirely inside it. The thought as an object, rather than the thought as the world. From inside a difficult thought, an anxiety, a rehearsed argument, the memory of something that didn't go well, you are partly blinded by it. The emotion and the thinking and the urgency are tangled together, each amplifying the others, and the sense of being overwhelmed is partly a function of that tangle. But when you catch yourself having the thought, something separates. The anxiety becomes locatable. You can feel where it actually sits, what it is really about beneath the surface. The thought becomes more distinct, not more distant. This is the opposite of what people fear when they hear step back, that it will mean caring less, feeling less. What actually happens is that you can feel it more accurately. Sati, remembering, is a more useful word for this than concentration or focus, both of which suggest sustaining a particular state. You don't sustain it, you return to it. Papancha is older and faster than any intention you bring to it, and you will be inside the thinking again before you notice you've moved. That isn't a failure of the practice. That is the practice. Each return is complete in itself. There is no accumulated deficit from the times you forgot, no state that needs to be rebuilt. You notice you've been pulled back in, and you step back, and the step is always the same step regardless of how far in you were. Most of what we call working on ourselves is an attempt to change the content of the thinking, better thoughts, more useful responses to difficult ones, more constructive habits of mind. All of it is still happening inside the thinking, still papanka, working on papanka. It isn't useless, but it is a different project from the one Sati is pointing at. What noticing does isn't modify the content, it changes your relationship to the content. And from that shift, the content begins to land differently. Not because the thinking has been improved, but because it is no longer being taken as the final word on things. The lamp is still burning. The thoughts are still arriving, still doing what thoughts do. But you are not the lamp. From inside a thought, it feels like a fact. Something with weight, certainty, the quality of having settled the matter. The thought that says you've failed, or made the wrong call, or that things will not improve. It arrives with that authority, and when you're inside it, you can't see around it. This isn't a weakness, it's just what thoughts do when there's no one watching them. When you step back, not far, not with great effort, just to the one watching, something changes. The thought is still there, still with its content intact, but it is no longer the whole of what's happening. It is weather, moving through something larger than itself. Think of the sky on a day of heavy cloud cover, not a patch of blue visible anywhere, gray in every direction, low and close. The sky seems to have disappeared, and yet it is there. It is always there. What you are seeing is not the sky. It is what is happening in the sky. The clouds are not the sky. They are moving through it. They form, shift, thicken, break apart, and at some point, whether you are watching for it or not, the blue reappears. The sky never changed. It never became the cloud. No storm, however prolonged, alters what the sky fundamentally is. Open, unchanging, the thing that holds whatever passes through it without being defined by any of it. The mind is like this. There will be days when papancha runs from morning, when a thought returns before you have finished with its last visit, when the overcast is complete and you cannot find the blue anywhere. The watching is still there beneath all of it. It doesn't need the clouds to stop. It simply holds them, has been holding them without interruption, for every thought you have ever had. The capacity to step back was there the entire time. The assumption that the voice was you simply kept it unnamed, and what goes unnamed stays out of reach. Now that it has a name, now that you know what sati actually means, what it points at, it becomes harder to lose entirely. The thoughts will come. The loops will start again because this is what minds do. But from time to time, there will be just enough sky between you and the weather to remember that you are not what's passing through. And that is enough.